Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a very exciting second segment coming up where I'll be looking over the updated Conn Smythe odds now that we are in the Game 7 realm. But before we get into that, I do want to remind you yet again that if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It is a huge support to both me, my fellow podcasters, and the network. Also, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can also leave them there, and I will get to them at the beginning of the next episode. So anything you leave is greatly appreciated. But without further ado, let's get into the second segment of today's show, looking at the updated Conn Smythe odds. When all is said and done, who will be the NHL Playoffs MVP? Now, this list has been very volatile because of the fact that A, you have two generational superstars on one team, in McDavid and Draisaitl, and then a super team of collective all-stars and above-average players in the Florida Panthers who, while they fill the list, can never hold a candle to what Connor McDavid and Levan Draisaitl have done in this postseason. And so, I think that's very reflective of what we see in these final Conn Smythe odds before Game 7. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. Obviously, number one on the betting list right now is McDavid at minus 5,000. In fact, he's the only one with those kinds of odds. The rest of the list is blank to 1 odds. McDavid is the only one who is a clear and steady favorite. And I think that's a just assessment of what Conn McDavid has done in this postseason. He's breaking records set by the great one who came before him in Wayne Gretzky. He scored a ridiculous amount of points. He's just proving his importance and his collective energy that really bolstered this Edmonton Oilers squad when they were in a very tough situation. He did it in the Western Conference Finals. He did it in the semifinals. And he's just maintained his level of dominance, and he just does Conn McDavid things at such a grand scale. I think that Game 6, obviously, he did not have a shot or point in that game. First time in quite some time, or maybe even ever, that Connor McDavid has not recorded a shot on goal or a point for Edmonton. It just goes to show that his presence alone really guarantees that everything centered around what the Oilers do best will be alright. They've grown to the point where they don't necessarily have to rely on Conn McDavid. They just rely on the fact that he will do what needs to be done, but they also need to realize that they are elevated around him. And that is what's so great about a player of Conn McDavid's caliber, is that he can have an off day, but his teammates always know that his energy and his physicality and what he brings to the ice just makes them that much better. And so that's the reason why Conn McDavid is the well-deserved favorite, and win or lose should lift the Conn Smythe Trophy. Looking at the rest of this list, you have in the second position Alexander Barkov, who in this tough stretch for the Florida Panthers definitely has looked like the best Florida Panther in these consecutive losses. And so I could see a point where, you can say that if Alexander Barkov scores, let's say, an overtime or game-winning goal tonight, the effect of that goal could reach voters, and they could say, hey, Alexander Barkov, when his team needed him, stepped up. But right now, I just don't see any way in which Connor McDavid doesn't get this trophy. Alexander Barkov definitely deserves it, because in a very, very tough, scary situation for the Florida Panthers, he has really elevated his game, trying to bolster this squad. But right now, he's not Connor McDavid. Connor McDavid is literally, in many respects of the word, dragged this Edmonton team to where they were. He had consecutive 4-point performances, and Alexander Barkov has just not been that level of player. He obviously scored, and who knows if that offsides goal, maybe if that offsides goal goes in, Florida might have come back and won that game. Who knows? that's the whole mystery of how voters will look at this. But I think that if Florida wins, there can be a case for Alexander Barkov, especially if he has a fantastic game tonight. And then looking at Sergei Bobrovsky at 100-1, his odds plummeted because he was in the number one spot for quite some time, Sergei Bobrovsky. But over these past couple of games when he's been shipping in goals, his stock has fallen drastically. And I don't even think a shutout tonight would even help him. I think that Sergei Bobrovsky, when you're a goalie in the Stanley Cup Finals, you really have to have at least 2 consecutive series where you are the catalyst for what your team has done. And Sergei Bobrovsky does have that, but in the Stanley Cup Finals, when you're a goalie and you're your team's best player, let alone in a tough position where you are the last line of defense, you have to be solid in every single game in order for voters to take notice of you. For the first 3 games, voters probably were thinking Sergei Bobrovsky is going to win this thing in a cakewalk because of his utter dominance in net in the first 3 games of the series. But now that the Oilers have figured him out, that's the reason why Bobrovsky is dropping drastically down this list. And there are a couple of people who are, in my humble opinion, could be above him. And so I could see Sergei Bobrovsky dropping further down the list when all is said and done. Like right before game time, his odds plummet drastically. And then you have Matthew Tkachuk. Obviously, he's also been a stellar player throughout the playoffs for Florida, not as much in the Stanley Cup Finals. I think he'll be more remembered for that goal line clearance in the Game 5 loss than anything else he did in the Stanley Cup. He's just been so quiet, and for someone who's viewed as a leader along with Barkov, Matthew Tkachuk just has had a very disappointing couple of games. And now let's get to the Oilers, who have seen their stock rise. In one player especially, in Zach Hyman, who, if he had more point production, could definitely be challenging McDavid right now for the Conn Smythe Trophy. He has had 16 goals in this playoffs, leads all players. So that definitely goes for him, but I think what's lacking for him is his level of point production. He is seen as more of a finisher than a distributor of the puck. He's one of those guys who stands around the net, waits for the puck to come to him, and he just finishes it off. And so that's probably why he's not as high as some other names on this list. But I can definitely see a world where if Zach Hyman had, say, 5 or 6 assists, he could definitely be in the conversation. And then, of course, Leon Draisaitl. Leon Draisaitl hasn't really had a standout performance in the Stanley Cup Final, and that's definitely hurt him. Obviously, we talked about Leon Draisaitl in the playoffs in the past, where obviously health was a big factor for him. He was very unhealthy 2 years ago. You could see it in his style of play, and you're kind of seeing it now, what with his diminished production levels. And so I think that Leon Draisaitl is one of those guys who maybe in a different year, if he was the star of the team, then he would win this award handily. But right now, Leon Draisaitl does not have that level of prowess yet to utterly take over a race. And right now, it's McDavid's to lose because of the fact that he's breaking records. He's the fulcrum of this team. He's what makes it tick. He's making history. This is his first time in the Stanley Cup Final as well. It's been a long journey to the mountaintop, and it would be a perfect end, both win or lose, for McDavid to come away with a Conn Smythe Trophy, because it will clearly show that his level of performance is unmatched in today's NHL. But that should just about do it for this segment of today's show. Coming up next, we are transitioning from hockey to soccer. We'll be looking at the updated Golden Boot odds for the Euros. And I must say this is a very skeptical list, but we'll see how you guys react to it. We'll be right back to talk about that list.
Looking for your daily fix of sports?